Good evening to everybody and welcome. Tonight is a special program from the local chapter of the Bergen County Audubon Society with Don Torino, and Elaine Silverstein will act as kind of our co-host tonight, our resident guru of all things growing naturally in Bergen County. And I want to welcome everyone. This is part of our environmental series as we talk about different things from climate to natural world and fresh water and all those things involved. So we want to welcome everyone and thank you for participating. I'm going to turn over my efforts to Elaine, who can welcome everyone and introduce Don. Elaine?
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to ask you to please mute yourselves while the program is going on. And if you have questions for Don, please type them into the chat. You'll see a chat button at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on it, you can type your questions in there. I'm Elaine Silverstein. I'm a member of the congregation. I think I probably know all of you. And I'm also the co-leader of the Bergen Passaic chapter of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. And in that capacity, I have worked with Don over the years. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Don Torino, who is president of the Bergen County Audubon Society, which is a chapter of the National Audubon Society and has been extremely active in promoting native plants and sustainable landscaping in this area. Don is going to talk tonight about how you can get your garden certified as a wildlife habitat, which is actually easier than you think and is a thing very dear to my heart. Don has lived in the Meadowlands all his life, I believe, and he probably knows it better than most people in the world do. And he has recently published a book called My Life in the Meadowlands, which you can find on Amazon. So again, it's my great pleasure to introduce Don, and I hope you all enjoy the presentation. Don't forget, just please type your questions into the chat.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation. And let me share my screen. Make sure everything works. Alrighty, and let's see. All right. So thank you, everybody. Much appreciated. And this is one of my, well, let me talk about Bergen County Audubon a little bit. Now, we're all volunteer organization. Like Elaine said, we're the local chapter of the National Audubon Society. And even though we're called Bergen County Audubon Society, our chapter jurisdiction now goes into all of Hudson County, most of Passaic County, and into Morris County. So we're more or less the Northern New Jersey chapter. So we're active in all those areas. But about 80 years, last year we were 80 years old. So we just thought it was just too late to change our name now. So this is really one of my favorite programs to do. And the reason for that is because I love things that empower people, that enable us to do what individuals to make a difference, right? There's so many things in the environmental movement that could be very frustrating at times. I mean, if climate change doesn't get you depressed, I don't know what will, and so many things we ask people to write to the president, write to the governor, write to your congressman, your local mayor. But this is something that we could all do, that we can make a difference tomorrow, this spring, in our backyards, in our neighborhoods, and really help wildlife, and also have a positive effect to fight climate change. And we'll talk about how we can do that. Well, every backyard is important, and it sounds kind of strange, and when I first started doing this in my own yard years and years ago, I said, well, I have a very small yard in the Meadowlands area, really smack in an industrial area. And I said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put in native plants and I'm going to just try to help the wildlife. Well, that first year there were hummingbirds. I mean, hummingbirds, species, 20 species of butterflies, pollinators. Over the years, I've had about 80 species of birds visit my yard. So it's really incredible what we can accomplish. So why did we at Bergen Audubon start the program? Well, we all knew that look, anybody that's grown up in the area right? We know what's happened to the environment, how much we lost. I mean, talk to anybody, the difference that, you know, we played in woods, we played in ponds that just don't exist anymore. So really, and it's difficult, very difficult to buy property for the government, right? So I'm on the Open Space Trust Fund Committee in Bergen County. And boy, now it's really, there's nothing, very little, I should say nothing, but there's very little out there for the county to buy up an open space. Either it's too expensive, they're not willing to sell. But there's one thing that we can do, right? What we can do is change the habitats in our yards. So the idea of the program is really to connect all those places. So over the years, you know, we thought about, you know, well, should we do, how could we do it as Bergen County Audubon Society? How could we work this program in, and how we talk? So we talked about it for a few years with our board, kind of going back and forth until one year, one of our volunteers was tagging monarch butterflies. And yes, you can tag monarch butterflies to track their migration. So he was in Palisades Park and tagged, I think, probably 10 butterflies that were in his yard. Well, like a week later, two of those butterflies showed up, believe it or not, in Hackensack, in the backyard of our education director, Marie Longo. So, I mean, you know, it's so surprising to find these little critters and then to discover them miles away in her yard, who has a great, amazing yard full of native plants. So we know, like, what was in between? How did the butterflies make it there? Where were the other ones? And we knew then how important, it showed us, you know, in plain terms, how important every backyard is. So we said, well, we have to come up with a program to promote this idea to everyone. And believe it or not, last year, one of those tagged monarchs that Marie did, and this is Marie out with our garden kids at Overpack, and one of those were actually tracked to found in Delaware. So she tagged it in Hackensack, and they saw the tagged butterfly because they read the number in Delaware. You know, so it's really, really incredible what we can do. But this is a special bird. This is a great example of the wood thrush and how we can help, and why our birds also need help. In New Jersey, the wood thrush is a species of concern. And I grew up just listening to the call. I grew up in places like Teterboro Woods and Lowson Slough, listening to the most magnificent song in nature. Well, over the years, that song has really become pretty quiet as the species tends to disappear. And we'll talk a little about why. So if you see on that map, there's places that where it overwinters in Central America, and those certain populations will come back to North America to nest. And as those habitats kind of change, this is what happens, right? They become fragmented. The population has come down. 55% decline over the past 50 years because of that habitat breakup, and 41% of all little birds have declined. You know, we lost about 3 billion birds since 1970, basically because of what we're talking about right here. So this is what's happened. You know, this is where we live, right? This is Bergen County, right? Wherever it was. So 54% now developed or suburban areas, and that's suburban urban matrix. And then to make that worse, what we're using plants, we're introducing plants that are non-native, which are no benefit to birds or wildlife or pollinators or really anything. So it would be basically the same as if you have a habitat full of non-native plants and it looks beautiful to the eye, and you say to yourself, oh, I have a beautiful backyard. But to our wildlife, to our birds, to our pollinators, to our butterflies, it might as well be plastic, right? So it would be like a friend of mine always says to me, well, you know, it's equal to me walking into ShopRite and I'm real hungry and I go down the produce aisle and everything looks good until I get close and I realize that all the fruit and vegetables are plastic. That's about the same thing if our yards are full of non-native plants. And as you could see, the housing density increases, and that big word biodiversity is just kind of being eliminated, which is really scary stuff. And there's 3 billion birds lost since 1970. Anybody, again, it's kind of a slow thing. It seemed like a slow thing until you wake up one day and say, so many people say, hey, Don, I don't see the birds like I did when I was a kid, or I did that many. Well, there's a reason for that. And that's the reason. So bring it down to a more local level, right? I mean, our habitat has become fragmented, isolated, like a quilt work of habitat. So what our certification program plans to do is create stepping stones, right? We can't make places. Who has a favorite nature center? I love Teaneck Creek, right? I can't make Teaneck Creek bigger. I would have to buy up all kinds of houses and knock them down, and that's not going to happen. But we can make it bigger by changing the landscape within those yards, right? Within those businesses, with this houses of worship, to change that landscaping. And so you want to do something about climate change like we all do, and help relieve the stresses off of birds and our pollinators, is to plant native plants. And ultimately, really, right, it creates a better, healthier place for all of us, right? We're part of that habitat just as much. So as of a few days ago, we're up to 178 certified yards. And we're into Pennsylvania now, certifying places, and New York State. So and Missouri, we even have a certified yard now. So we're all over, and those little blue jay heads and so the plan is working, right? We're connected all those places. So again, every backyard is important. We're gonna certify. This is a free program, right? We made sure that there's got no charges for this, and this is just a way to connect everything, to show that we're connecting everything. So you be added to the map. You get a nice sign, and the whole thing, and really restoring the ecology of suburbia. That's what we're really doing, changing the whole way. If you're into a yard like Elaine's, which I've never been to, but I heard it's great. But you take that and just imagine, I'm sure Elaine sits back and says, what if every yard in my neighborhood was like mine? What if everybody, you would live in a totally different environment, a totally different place. So that's what we're trying to do, is to increase that, change that environment for everybody. And look, in New Jersey, this is the place to be. So they can make fun of New Jersey, Bergen County. I don't tolerate those silly jokes anymore. We live on the Atlantic Flyway. This is the major highway for migratory birds, and we're really leading up to the height of migration. So millions of birds are going to travel that migration highway right up through New Jersey. It's like the Route 80, the Garden State Parkway, the New Jersey Turnpike, whatever you want, right through New Jersey. This is the place to be. And if you're a birder, it's number probably 4 or 5 as far as the number of bird species that you could see, right? In a small state, we have all those different environments, all those different habitats in such a small concentrated area, that you can go to places like Colorado or something, and you're going to see more birds here in New Jersey. That's just the way it is. So you're really blessed. You may not think so, but we're really blessed to live here and experience the wildlife that we can, right close to our home, right outside our door, more or less. So so what we're doing is creating ecosystems, right, that benefit more than birds, right? You could put up a sign, this is a bird garden, or it's a butterfly garden, but luckily a wildlife can't read. So you're increasing those places for butterflies, for moths, for bats, for bees, pollinators, bugs. And when all things are in balance, it's amazing. It's amazing what can happen. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. It really is. Again, I have a tiny yard, and I said, okay, maybe something I'll do. No, it's like the wildlife is just waiting out there, waiting for you to put in these. And look, these plants are just as beautiful as any. So with any habitat, there's 4 basic elements: food, water, shelter, and nesting places. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to enhance each one of those. So our goals of a certified wildlife garden: native plantings, number 1. That's the most important thing that we can do anywhere. That is really the foundation of any habitat. You could have bird feeders, you could have this, you could have that. It's the native plants are really what's important. So that big word now, that popular word, biodiversity, we have to increase that biodiversity, provide some food and water, shelter opportunity, nesting opportunities that we're talking about. We want to decrease those non-native, get rid of those invasive plants. Now I spend, and now I'm starting up, I'm going to spend most of the spring, summer, and fall ridding places of invasive plants. And it's really, you know, and if you're planting, if you have invasives and you plant in yard and you say, oh, they don't go anywhere. Well, you can come out and spend the summer with me pulling things like barberry and burning bush, just horrible stuff. So decrease the lawn size, no pesticide use. Don't want that for yourself either. Herbicides, not healthy for you, not healthy for our environment. So especially talking about bird habitat, it's like a 4-layer cake, something called stratification in ornithology. So ideally, and I say ideally, not everybody can do this, but even if you're out birding, some birds will use the upper canopy, some the lower canopy, some the shrub layer, and some the ground layer. So if you increase all those layers with native plants, the more birds you're going to get. But again, we all can't do that. So if you want to have a butterfly garden, you just got open space with a lot of sun, that's fine. You got a lot of shade, you create a woodland garden. There's something you could do in every yard. That's what we're really looking to accomplish here. So why native plants? Well, they evolved here forever, right? Our birds evolve with them. They depend on them. They get their food, everything the right time. It's all interconnected, right? They adapt better to their soils. They belong here, right? I mean, you know why you got to put lime all the time on your lawn to grow? Because you have to change the soil for a non-native plant. That's what you're doing. So our natives don't need you for to change the soil. They're happy that they evolved in that same soil that we have. They require less care. And obviously nobody's running around the forest, you know, watering these things or fertilizing these things, and they do just fine. So let's talk about the 4 native plant food groups for birds, just like we have them. Well, fruits and berries, we know that, right? Birds need. Very, very particular and very specific on what is nutritional value for them and when those berries come out. Nuts and seeds, things like our oak trees. Nectar plants like that cardinal flower for our hummingbirds. And what else? The most important thing now, you know, this is why I challenge everybody to start thinking differently. That's what we have to do, is think differently about our yards. The most important one above all these is what? Insects. And unless you have those native plants that attract the insects, these birds, 96% of land birds feed insect to their chicks. They're not feeding them seeds, they're not feeding them nuts, not even fruits. That comes later. On the nest, that high fat, high protein are insects. And that's what that wood thrush needs. That's what the babies are raised on. So you have the native plants that attract the insects in turn. If you ever watched a bird, I watched an oriole for a whole day one day. I watched it from early in the morning. That oriole got up and went back and forth to some a lot of different shrubs, some grapevines, and brought insects back, little caterpillars to the babies all day, sun up to sundown, sun up to sundown. It's amazing how many they can eat. If they're not there, if those insects aren't there, they can't raise their babies. They can't have the next generation. It'll fail. And that's what's causing a drop in populations. So look at chickadees, nesting chickadees, 390 to 570 caterpillars a day, over 9,000 caterpillars as they fledge. And that's one chickadee nest. It's really incredible. So let's talk about the awful stuff for a bit. And this is stuff that still, so some of it's still sold in nurseries, unfortunately, that we still plant, sometimes landscape. And this is only really just a small man, you know, like we can go, and I hate spending all the time on negative stuff, but Japanese barberry, burning bush, mugwort grows wild, multiflora rose, these things, a mile a minute, it's a whole nother thing, but these things take the breath out of me just looking at them, because they just are so rather than next to a bulldozer, right? Next to a bulldozer plowing over a piece of property, this is the next best thing, worst thing, or probably just as bad. So they disrupt all the natural habitats. There's no more biodiversity. I could show you places where the floor of the forest is nothing but Japanese knotweed. It's nothing but privet hedge. There's nothing but barberry, and really cutting out really any diversity or any benefit to wildlife. And again, next to habitat loss, it's really, really sad. So that's why I challenge you to think differently. And this is something, as gardeners, right? I mean, I grew up with an old Italian grandmother. Something got a hole in a leaf. She wanted to get a nuclear weapon. It was horrible, But but if something is not eating your plants, then something is wrong. It's not right. It's part of the ecosystem. And like I said, but all things are in balance. It's all good. It all works out just fine.
Edith,
let me
I'm
give you an
watching a
example.
Zoom program. Can I call you back?
Let me give you an example.
I want
Let me give you an example. Wild cherry trees. Now, the birds are going to eat the cherries, right? And it gets flowers for the pollinators. But 448 species of moths and butterflies will lay their eggs and use that wild cherry tree. 448 species that get beautiful birds like that scarlet tanager. If you wanted to compare that to something like a Bradford pear, which people put in, or a ginkgo tree, zero, none, insects, none. And if there's no insects eating that tree, there's no insects for that wonderful thing like the Canada warbler. And I love that picture of the American snout butterfly because I love those holes in the leaves, because that's a beautiful thing that something's right in the world. So really, we couldn't survive. If there were no insects left in the world, we wouldn't be here. We couldn't survive. And that's why the plants are really the foundation of a habitat. Now, the magic tree, the most important single tree in the forest are the oaks, especially the white oak, right? And the reason I call them the magic trees, so if you're a birder, and we experienced this years and years, before all the science was really out. I mean, I urge you to read some Douglas Tolomei's book on Bringing Nature Home and his latest book on the oaks. 517 species of Lepidoptera will use those oak trees. So when we're out birding, sometimes we're in an area, that were very few native trees. So we knew as birders, find the oak tree, because if we find an oak tree, we're going to find birds. We weren't really sure why. Really, that there were going to be good birds in those oak trees. Well, now we know why, because 517 species of food species are up there for our migrating birds, and not even counting the benefit of the acorns. And just to go down the line, you could see all those numbers of how many things are Lepidoptera, how important they are compared to non-native species. Warblers, those beautiful, those flying jewels, are headed here from Central America, and birders go wild just to see these beautiful little things like black-throated green, chestnuts. These aren't birds that are going to eat seed. They do not eat seed. Those are insect eaters, and they're dependent on those native plants. So, and most of these little birds now are migrating. And like, can you imagine flying from Central America, maybe all the way up to Canada? Can you imagine the hazards? We need GPS to go around the corner. These birds are coming from Central and South America right through here. And so unless the food source is there, first the habitat's fragmented, it's cut up, it's a long distance. And then they come, say they land into your backyard. They're exhausted. They have, just like you're on a road trip, you stop somewhere and you got to get food, you got to get water, you got to rest. Your backyard may be that place. And unless the food source is there, they may not make it to the next place without some insects that they could eat. And so very important what we decide to do with our backyards. Smaller trees like serviceberry. So you go into that lower canopy. I love a serviceberry tree. Probably attracts 60 different species of birds like that rose-breasted grosbeak. And I could eat those serviceberries. They're like blueberries. I just love them. But the birds are going to get to them before I do, which is okay. Our native dogwood trees. Now, we tend to plant those Coosa dogwoods. Now, non-native, you go to a nursery and they say, plant the Coosa dogwood because it doesn't get diseases. Well, it's the Coosa dogwood that brought our native dogwoods diseases, right? And those non-native ones are not beneficial. They get their berries at the wrong time. They're too big for the birds. But our wonderful trees like our pagoda dogwood and our native flowering dogwood, put a plant in the right place too. These are understory plants. They're not really meant to stand all alone out in the lawn in hot summer. So put a plant in the right place, but these are just beautiful trees. I have a pagoda dogwood in my backyard. I put a chair under it while the birds come eat all the seed, all the berries. It's just great. Here's another example of what, perfection is in our native plants. Eastern red cedar, cedar waxwings. See all that connection. Eastern red cedars are an evergreen tree. They nesting places. The female plant gets that blueberries, which are a great source for birds throughout the winter. Protection from storms. They really do their job. Then we can go down into the next layer, and we can go on and on about all the shrub, but American elderberry, the witherrod viburnum, the brandywine. It's just, we can go on. Chokeberry, and some berries like the chokeberry really have to freeze and get cold before the birds really love them. It's like a holly, like American holly, right? You don't see the birds eating them much. Then all of a sudden it's wintertime, there's nothing left. You get a cold snap, it freezes those berries, gets them nice and sweet, and you'll get things like the hermit thrush that'll be all over them. And it's not unusual to get a flock of robins all over these shrubs in the middle of winter, and that's normal. So the old husband's tale about robins being the first bird of spring, no truth to that. They're around all the time. Native dogwood shrubs, silky dogwood, red twig dogwoods, excellent. Host plants for butterflies too, and the flowers are nectar sources. The silky dogwoods will get things like the little spring Asia butterflies. Now, let's talk about our native butterfly bush, our button bush. Now, I know people love the butterfly bushes. They're non-native, and they can be an invasive. And I know they attract butterflies, but there's a lot of studies out that say it's totally wrong nutritional value for our butterflies. It's like giving a kid a can of Coke every day. You wouldn't want to do that. But our button bush is really our native butterfly bush, and that's the one you want to plant for beautiful butterflies like that eastern tiger swallowtail. And I think a spice bush is really is the display of what, if I had to name a perfect native plant, not that, there's one more perfect than the other, but a spice bush, right? So a spice bush are male and female plants. The female plants gets little yellow flowers like forsythia in the spring, a little smaller. Now forsythia doesn't have any value to it, but spice bush does. It grows in sun or shade. It gets those nice big fat red berries at perfectly the right time when our birds need them for migration, right? Yes, everything connected now, remember that. So, and for birds like that great crested flycatcher, but also it's the host plant for our spice bush swallowtail. That butterfly needs spice bush to lay their eggs on, so the caterpillars eat it and turn into the beautiful spice bush swallowtail. You see all those different things or different niches that our native plants fall into. They're just so important. Go into our ground laters, and we can go on and on about flowers, but the agastachy, the hyssop is a great one. And you could see, let it go to seed. It gets hummingbirds, it gets butterflies. And if you let it go to seed, you see the goldfinches all over. You look closer at that picture on the right, you'll see the little goldfinches picking the seeds out of it. Joe Pye weed. A lot of our native wildflowers are called weeds. So just get used to that. But, Joe Pye weed, and there's ironweed, and there's milkweed, and that's okay. That's a good thing. So I really urge everybody to learn the botanical names of plants when they go into a nursery, because if you go looking for a viburnum, you might get 10 species that are non-native. So you really want to be particular about educate yourself a little bit about what you're looking for, and make sure that they don't try to sell you anything else, because that can happen too. So we talked about monarchs at the beginning, right? Well, we need milkweed in every yard. Milkweed is the only thing that's going to save the monarchs. It is the only plant that monarch butterflies will lay their eggs on. Without milkweed, there are no monarch butterflies. It's plain and simple. And the monarchs should probably be an endangered species. That the population the eastern population has just really fell terribly. But I can tell you something encouraging, is that the latest studies show that the individual gardens, individual habitat projects have really saved the monarch butterfly. That's what's really going on now. You know, we were so worried about the Midwest. The Midwest population was decimated because farmers went to genetically engineered crops, which allowed farmers to spray more Roundup everywhere, which killed all the milkweed fields, which killed the monarchs. But it looks like now that we're making individuals, again, and this is empowering, right? That individuals have made up that difference, at least for now, keeping the monarch population going. And another thing real interesting is that now that population going all the way up to Canada is coming down like a funnel during fall migration right through New Jersey. So get to that special place in New Jersey, go through Cape May. We need to have our native plants. We need to have that habitat ready for our monarch butterflies. And that's me working with the DOT last year. And that's right there in Teaneck, by the way. That's at right off of the Grower Avenue. If you would go on to Route 80, I think Turnpike, and they were cutting down the milkweed there every year. And I got kind of mad at them. So they did kind enough to join with me and to rope it off and create a pollinator habitat right there. And that's what we need to do. That's one of the great things we could do. We don't have to buy that property up. We just get people like the DOT to manage it for butterflies and pollinators. And that's why we need milkweed right there. And that's an overpeck garden. That's a monarch laying eggs. And what they'll do is deposit an egg. Don't need flowers on the milkweed to lay eggs. Milkweed is a great nectar source for many pollinators, but all they need is that milkweed leaves to lay their eggs on it, and they'll deposit a little egg right underneath those leaves, and we can go. More great native wildflowers, New York ironweed, cardinal flower. You love hummingbirds? You love hummingbirds, plant cardinal flower. I think it's the only thing that could pollinate a cardinal flower is a hummingbird, and they just seem to come out of nowhere for that magnificent plant. Now, goldenrod's got a bad rap, right? But this is one of the most important plants, flowers, especially, excuse me, in late summer and fall that we could have. Those monarchs are coming south. They need a food source as they go along, coming through that funnel in New Jersey and south. And goldenrod is one of those most important things that we could have for many pollinators. And that's not what you're allergic to, right? That's what we kind of learned, but it's really the ragweed that you're allergic, which blooms at the same time. And there's all different species of goldenrod, big, little ones, short ones, big ones, something for every yard. That's really a must-have. Asters are the other one that's just as important. Asters, so we like to plant mums in the fall to asters. Much better. They're the host plant for that little pearl crescent butterfly, which is magnificent. The seeds, again, great one from bee balm, monarda. Again, hummingbirds, I love those hummingbirds. That bee balm, they sell that everywhere. Easy to grow. And come over to our butterfly garden at Overpack in the summer. It's a butterfly, festival there. I mean, a hummingbird festival there. It's really wild. And you'll get to see the really magical bird if there ever was one. Vines too, trumpet vine. Not only do the hummingbirds love it, but the oriole loves the trumpet vine. They love nectar. They'll poke out holes in the back of those flowers and drink the nectar, kind of the same way that the hummingbirds do. But here you go. Just again, another example of how important native plants are. We have a trumpet vine moth, right? So they're not only good for one species. More Virginia creeper you might pull out of your yard. Great native shrub. And honeysuckle. Love native hunters. Do not get the non-native honeysuckle. There's so many invasive ones, not the Oriental or the Japanese honeysuckle, which grows everywhere. That native honeysuckle is very tame. And boy, the hummingbirds will knock on your door and kiss you if you plant a honeysuckle. And that Virginia creeper, what do we get? A Virginia creeper sphinx moth. And that's my hand from a few years back. Pipevine is another great example of how we as individuals could help species. Pipevine was a Dutchman's pipe, was something that they tell me that the early 1900s, people grew on their porches. People loved it. It kind of fell out of favor. Porches fell out of favor. Remember when people used to sit on the porch? And so did the pipevine swallowtail. No more host plant until people got the idea a few years back, hey, we could help this butterfly, we could bring it back, and by planting Pipevine, Dutchman's pipe, and that's our baby caterpillars at one of our gardens. That was at our Overpack garden. They are wild, creepy looking, dotted, and those little spike things come out when they're excited, you know, but they are just beauties. Native grasses, very important. You know, we don't think of grasses as being important natives, but stay away from those invasive grasses. We got so many beautiful native grasses like switchgrass, which help things like the song sparrow, but also they're the host plant for butterflies. We don't think of grasses for butterflies, right? But again, this is how important our native species are. Delaware skipper, northern broken dash depend on those native grasses to lay their eggs. And look, so 94% of moth caterpillars pupate in the groundlet. This is something else we have to change what we do, right? So important that we don't rake up, but don't, you know, that's the worst thing. Don't be a neat gardener, because so many people tell me, Don, I don't see the lightning bugs. I don't see Luna moth like I used to. Well, you're throwing them out. You're raking them up, you're cutting them back, and you're throwing them out. So don't cut back your garden. Don't rake it up. Leave those leaves for the winter. The birds dependent on it, the lightning bugs, and that biodiversity really. But we could do a whole program on just leaving the leaves. Bird feeders are fine if you want to have them. They're a great way to connect with birds. Just and they're not part of the you don't have to have feeders to be certified at all. It's really about the diversity of native plants. So if you do feeders, just make sure you keep the ground clean, keep the feeders clean, and you'll be just fine. So habitats are beautiful, right? I don't want you to think you have to make this wild, jungly kind of place. They're just as beautiful areas, but just using native plants in them. So some basics: organic fertilizer only if you need to fertilize, no pesticides, improve the soil, compost, leave the leaves, organic mulch, don't use rubber mulch, don't use rocks, that kind of stuff. So be natural, it's better for you. It's better healthier for us too. And somehow this guy who's crying always makes it into my program somewhere or another. And if you're going to cry about a groundhog, I'm probably the last person to cry to, because I just love those guys. They're just really part of the deal. The squirrels, the groundhogs, just part of the deal. Water sources, you know, think about it. Again, you played on a pond when you were a kid. You played on a lake, a stream that isn't there anymore. Our birds need water just like we do. So providing even just a tray of clean water every day is great. And if you can make a pond, even better. Just remember to keep it shallow. I get really terrible phone calls sometimes in the summer where they have a pond and birds are drowning in it because they don't create shallow areas on the edges that birds can get out of the water on. So, and you know, landscape those with native plants too. And that's a whole micro habitat within a habitat, right? That wetland habitat you can create. Very important. Keep the dead trees up that you have. Don't cut them all down, even if you have to keep a few feet up. You know, you don't want the tree to be a danger and fall in your house. Nobody wants that. But if you have an area, if you have, like, you can keep 5 feet up, or at 6 feet up, 10 feet, where it's not going to fall and hurt anything. These birds are really dependent on it for food, for nesting places. Dead snags are an important part of the habitat. And, you know, there's a housing shortage in New Jersey. We know that. Well, how do you make up for that? By putting up nesting places. That really, really helps. I can tell you that in places like Teaneck Creek and everywhere we put up nest boxes, I don't think one of them ever goes empty. Along Chapman Trail will be adding more. But just to give you an example, on that left side, that's a house wren feeding its young. On the right side is a downy woodpecker, but that downy woodpecker isn't nesting in there. After the wren's nested in there, he's actually taking those, or she actually is taking those sticks out. And that woodpecker is going to use that place to spend the winter. And then she's going to move out and find a place to nest. I don't usually nest in nest boxes, but they use it for winter. So so it's good to keep them up all year. Very important. And that's really great, because we can't, you know, it's tough having enough of those dead trees, having enough nesting places. We can really help by putting up things like for chickadees and even screech owls and woodpeckers. To put up those boxes, even those little shelves for things like robins. You know, sometimes they nest on top of your air conditioner. on a shelf, but putting up those little nesting platforms, even for phoebes, would be happy to use them too. Don't forget bats, very important. We complain about mosquitoes, right? Well, one of the reasons is we don't have enough bats. Bat houses are great, hot, sunny location, at least 15 feet up, and you can get some bats, eat your mosquitoes. So some great resources, Audubon Plants for Birds, where you can go on to that and you could put in your zip code and it'll give you a list of some native plants that you could use, will work right in your area. That's a mockingbird feeding on pokeweed. All right, conservation begins at home. So we always think save the rainforest, save this forest. Well, let's save our backyards. Let's save our schoolyards. Let's save our houses of worship yards and anywhere we can. Right. So our program is totally free. You can go on bergencounty-audubon.org, CWG, and download the form. And it's really easy. And we're going to give you a nice sign. That's our first school that was certified in Saddlebrook a few years ago. We're happy to have those great schools that really do a lot of great work with birds and native plants. And places you can go, New Jersey Botanical Garden in Ringwood. We have our gardens there that really are beautiful. We'll be doing a walk there. We do a walk there a month. We have great butterfly walks there in the summer. That's the butterfly garden. Teaneck Creek. We have a great butterfly garden there for probably 10 years now. Unfortunately, right now, because of remediation, it's closed to the public, but get on our email list. We're going to be doing some programs there through the summer. That's just a beautiful place. The Meadowlands, the Court Park, we've been doing work there for years and years, and that's really our home base is the court, where we do a lot of our major programs there. And what's interesting about the Court Park, Richard the Court Park in the Meadowlands, is that when it was established, probably 45 years ago now, there was very little native plants to be had and very little knowledge about native plants, as much as there is now, at least. So we're really in the process now of working with the NGSCA on breeding some of those invasives and putting in more and more native plants. And Bergen Audubon, I would say, over the years has probably put in $60,000 into native plants, and we'll be doing more there at the court. And that's where we do a butterfly day and native plant day and birding festival. So it's a place close to all our hearts. This place is close to my heart too. This is our butterfly garden at the Bergen Equestrian Center at Overpack Park, which was really set up as a learning area, habitat restoration project, but also a learning area to come out and learn about the native plants, see the butterflies and hummingbirds in action. And you're certainly welcome to come out there and see what's going on as things come out now. But, as season goes on and things start to grow, it's a beautiful place. And don't tell anybody that's where I go to hide so people can't find me. So of all the paths you take in life, make sure a few of them in dirt. John, and get your garden certified. Go to bergencounty-audubon.org, CWG. It's our friend Steve Quinn and his wife. And Native Plant Day is May 15th at the Meadowlands at the Court Park from 10 to 2. We're going to be doing native plant walks, talks, all kinds of fun stuff. It's a great day for everybody, for kids, family. So come on out and join us. It's going to be a great day. My new book. Please buy my book if you love the Meadowlands. I'm selling it at cost. You can get it on Amazon. I'm doing a book signing at Wild Birds Unlimited on Saturday afternoon, but I hope you enjoy that. And you can find me and I'll sign it for you. So, and please join Bergen County Audubon Society. It really helps us continue all our work. We depend on all our members. So I really do appreciate the time, and I hope I gave you something to think about today.
Well, Don, that was truly amazing. Much more than I had possibly thought was possible. You're a fountain of knowledge, no question.
Thank
and
you.
I can appreciate your authorship even more. Elaine, some comments?
Well, I have heard this talk before, and I could listen to it every night because Don's enthusiasm is wonderful. And as many of you know, if you give me the slightest opportunity, I will tell you all the same stuff. So it gets me very, very excited. But if you have questions, you probably could just put on your video and raise your hands because there aren't that many of them. So Eric is asking if New Jersey Audubon, National Audubon, and New Jersey Audubon. Bergen County Audubon is separate. It's our local chapter of the National Audubon Society. It is not New Jersey Audubon.
Right.
And it's very, very worthwhile to join Bergen County Audubon. They have lots and lots of bird walks, several a week. They have just all kinds of activities. That butterfly festival that they do every year in the Meadowlands is terrific. Our chapter of the Native Plant Society will be there. Not me, but other people will be there. They're extremely active. So Stacy's saying she puts little treats in the garbage can lids. Go ahead, Stacy. Go ahead.
If I'm out gardening and I see like a couple of thick, fat grubs that I know that the birds would love,
Yeah.
I put them beside the bird bath, in the bird bath, on a brick in the bird bath. They never take it.
No.
Worms.
Yeah, they may, but at that time they may be finding enough on their own. It could be, but you know that birds have to see them too. You know, it's all about finding them and their eyesight, and you would probably they'd have to be looking there and probably be consistent for a few days. I mean, sometimes you get lucky and put something out, and you know, I remember a day when I had some zizia plants in a pot, and I was all excited because I had black swallowtail caterpillars on them, and they were on my potting table. And there was a blue jay above my head looking at me. I said, well, you know, okay. So I'm going to go in and get my camera. You know, I came out and each one of those caterpillars was gone. And I saw that blue jay was hooking his chops up in that tree. But so they just have to find them. And it could be just a matter of, you know, what food is available.
Also, their birds are looking for particular things in particular places. So they may not be looking for food on the bird bath, you know,
Right.
So that's not where they expect to find it. But while you were talking, Don, I put some references in the chat for everybody. There's a fabulous new book called The Insect Crisis by Oliver Millman. I put the titles of all of Doug Tallamy's books in the chat. I put a link to a couple of links to Bergen Audubon, and I tried to put in Jersey Friendly Yards, which is a great organization here in New Jersey for doing just this kind of thing. And unfortunately, I typed Hersey Friendly Yards, but it's Jersey Friendly Yards. And as I said again, Bergen Audubon is different from New Jersey Audubon and from the National. It's a chapter of the National Audubon Society. It really has nothing to do with Jersey Audubon.
Yeah.
And it's very worthwhile to join it. Any other specific questions? I think, as many of you know, this is what I do. In fact, I've helped people certify their yards for this and for Xerces Society, and there are different ways to do it. So I have helped people do this. If anybody is interested, I will give you for free a list of native plants appropriate to your site and a list of sources where you can find them because they're not easy to find. Eric has a question.
Got to unmute.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. I'm unmuted. Yeah. Okay. So Elaine, you gave this something like this before. And I asked this question, but then I'm going to repeat it now. For those of us who don't have time to really become skilled and expert in this, are there landscapers or landscape architects that can help design a bird-friendly yard? And I know last time this question went nowhere, so I'm looking for more guidance this time. And I'll just thank you very much for listening to me.
I don't know of anybody besides myself.
Yeah, you know, I think if you I used to do that work when I was actually I'm retired now. I find that funny, but you know, when I used to design yards and people that's all I did was design them. People wanted landscapers to do it. And
Yeah, that's what I do too.
yeah, and so, so I would just say, if you find a good, ask around, there were good people out there, and you tell them what you want, right? So many times I find that landscapers are the boss of their client, rather than it being the other way around. You're their boss, you're paying them, right? You can pay them to do what you want to do. So just question them, say, look, I want native plants, and see what they know. There are ones that do that. They may not specialize it because they don't see the money in it yet, or they don't, but there are some, I would say, ask around some, and ask other people, and talk to the landscaper, and I think you might find one that's going to do the right thing, that, and I'm sure Elaine will help you, or I'll even help you if he comes up with a list of plants and you send them over to us, we'll go over them. But I think they're out there. I just can't name a particular one because I kind of been out of the loop with them for a few years. But
I'll make you a deal. I'll join BCAS in addition to New Jersey Audubon and Audubon in exchange for probably email or something, so that we can kind of continue this conversation some other time, because I have multiple properties and I'd love to be able to make them more. My wife's sitting next to me and she's the real tree hugger in the family. So
yeah, no, yeah.
Fern
So
Rock.
my email's out there, my telephone number. It's out there, but-
I have stock lists that I've developed over time because I do work with people, and I have a list of plants for wet shade, for dry shade, for sun, I'm happy to share those lists with you. So there's a question,
Okay.
another question here. Sorry. Carol would like to know, she says she has a very shady yard, which is full of weeds and some poison ivy. How do I start becoming a certified yard? First of all, poison ivy is native.
Yeah.
It's
Very
a very,
important
very
plant to
important
birds.
bird plant.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, go ahead, Don.
Well,
How
I
does
would
she
say
start?
first, see what you have. Identify what you have. You may be surprised at what natives you find there, and you may be more than halfway there. And then what. So to have some fun, take a walk in a local forest. I don't know where exactly you are, but if you walk places like Flat Rock Brook or Tenafly Nature Center into those wooded areas, that's what you want to really create, is those kind of, and wet shady areas are really very important habitats. That's the kind of habitat that's disappearing. And there's definitely a good list of plants that you could, so you create that forest habitat. Things like clethra and spicebush are really beautiful plants that you could create that habitat in. So, but first assess and see what you got, see what you have there. See if what you can identify there, then go from there. If there's stuff you want to remove, then remove it. Or if you got areas to introduce those natives in there, but you could definitely, don't get scared, it's trial and error too sometimes. We started restoring habitat 15 years ago, before there was, now that you have a wealth of information out there. 15 years ago, we were like, okay, let's try this, or that didn't work. Let's try this. And finally we got it down to where we know what's probably going to work, what's not going to work, but we're still experimenting. And one of the reasons we put in the butterfly garden at Overpack was exactly for that reason, to see what works, to see what we can grow, to see what work in other places, to see how the deer reacted, it's always changing. You're not creating a brick wall, right? Some plants are just not going to work. Other plants are going to surprise you. Plants are going to find their favorite place within your habitat. So don't be scared to try things, and you do a little at a time. But first, try to assess and see what you have. If you identify what you have already, then
It also helps to start with a very small area.
right.
Just,
Right, don't
mark
go
off
crazy.
3 by 6 square feet and pull out the things
Yeah.
that you determine to be invasive and put in some native plants in that area.
So assess, see
You'll
what
see a
trees
difference.
you got, try to identify the trees, and keep that poison ivy if you can, because the birds just love that. And so start from, and don't be a plant, so I the people I find that are frustrated sometimes are like, they want to be plant collectors. They want to collect plants like baseball cards. You really don't have to do that. You go with what works. You don't need to be a museum, you know? You just need to go with what works in that diversity in that area, you know?
Rare plants are rare for a reason. It's because they're fussy about where they can grow. Common plants are often the best ones for habitat anyway. They're common for a reason because they're easy to grow and they can grow in lots of different places.
Go with what works, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Anybody, any other questions?
Well, it was a terrific presentation, Don. I say I'm very impressed. Your PowerPoint was well put together and love the graphics. It really was very invigorating to see so many different species and animals, birds, bugs, you name it. I'll look at them a little differently now than I have before.
Right.
So that was really terrific and much appreciated.
Thank you. My pleasure.
We were watching a flock of white-throated sparrows for most of the morning, and then they came back in the afternoon today. And what they were doing was, I have an American plum tree. We have a native plum, which most people don't know, and I grow one. And they were all over. The tree is still bare, but they were pecking all over the branches. They were eating tiny bugs and caterpillars. We couldn't even see it, but they were native cherries and plums are one of those groups of plants that host hundreds of species of caterpillars. Yeah. So it was just amazing to watch. It was quite a large flock.
You know, the white-throated sparrows are one, you know, I talked about the monarch, one reason we started, but also the white-throated sparrows, one reason. And I can go back to going to work one morning. I'm at a light on Route 17, you know, over by the Bendix Diner. And there's a little patch of weeds and grasses. And as I'm stuck at a light going to work, I look over and it's full of white-throated sparrows. And this little patch of, you know, Route 17, Route 46. And I said, we got to do better. I can, you know, if those poor birds are there in this little patch of grass, what can I do? What can we do to help those birds? And yeah, habitat is where you find it. And it doesn't matter how small it is. It really doesn't. Don't worry about that. And that's why I'm so glad I have a small yard, because if I can do it, if I can do it, you know, I laugh when people tell me, oh, Don, I can't get hummingbirds. Well, where do you live? Well, I live in Upper Saddle River, and come on, really? Come on. You can do it. Just plant the right thing. You know, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And I saw the result firsthand of what a tiny piece of land could mean to our wildlife.
Yeah, we have a dry site. So for me, I see hummingbirds when the columbine blooms.
Right. And that's what they're usually following up as they're coming north. That's what they're looking for. They're using trees too, tree flowers, you know, but the columbines are important early flower for the hummers. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I want to bring our program to a close this evening and thank everyone for joining us. I want to remind everyone that this coming Sunday night at 7 o'clock, the Sierra Club, I have a trio of speakers to talk about climate change. So that should be something you might want to join, 7 o'clock. And we'll continue our excellent speaker series. And Don, you're right up there with the best.
Thanks.
No question about it. I'm totally impressed, and I can see why Elaine is your student, and she's doing a great job supporting you and supporting the environment and all the species that you mentioned today.
And everybody can get on our email list too. We have all kinds of free programs, you know, every month. We got one on climate change, National Audubon coming up next week, I think. And so just get on our email list and you'll get notified of all our programs.
Super job. Elaine, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
It was a big help, and I hope everyone else enjoyed it. I know that we're looking at your website and gathering up those details. And Elaine, thank you for the resources you put on chat. That's very helpful. I'm going to look forward to Eric Weiss making sure all his properties are much more.
Eric, I'll be happy to send you a list of plants and a list of places to get them.
There you go.
Elaine, thank you. Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the warm weather tomorrow.
Lila Tove.
Bye.